In the remote hollows of Appalachia, there are tales that even the oldest locals whisper about in half-lights and hurried glances. Tales that the newspapers never printed and the authorities pretended never existed. Tonight, we uncover one of those forbidden stories, a family secret so dark, so twisted, that it has been buried beneath decades of silence and shame. Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Imagine a house perched on the side of a mountain, its timbers blackened with age and storms, windows staring blankly into the night. Within those walls, a father held a secret that went beyond the usual tragedies of rural life, something that corrupted the bloodline he was meant to protect. Two sisters, innocent yet already marked by circumstances they did not choose, were trapped, not just by their surroundings, but by the very family bonds that should have sheltered them. Neighbors who once glimpsed them only spoke in hushed tones. They said the girls moved strangely, their appearances unsettling in ways people couldn't explain. Features sharpened unnaturally, eyes too wide, expressions hauntingly vacant. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like hardship or misfortune, but those who lived there knew something else lingered. A darkness rooted in the most intimate corner of family life. The father, a man known for his stoicism and reclusiveness, wielded control with a mix of fear and secrecy. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the flickering oil lamps, seemed to reinforce the girl's imprisonment. There was no escape. Letters went unanswered, visitors discouraged, and the few who ventured close found only silence, the air heavy with a presence they could not name. The father's presence was the gravity that anchored this household, but it was a gravity that warped everything around him. Local townspeople described him as quiet, almost invisible, except when he appeared suddenly, his gaze sharp, unsettling, as if he could read thoughts unspoken. He wasn't a man who sought attention, but within his own walls, he commanded fear, shaping every action of his daughters with subtle cruelty that left invisible scars. It's difficult to grasp the full extent of the girls' confinement. They were rarely seen outside, except for the occasional trip to gather water or collect firewood, always under his strict watch. Their clothing, though homemade, was meticulously maintained, not as a kindness, but as a sign of control. Even the simplest act of rebellion, like speaking too freely or lingering too long in the sun, would be met with punishment, a stare, a whispered threat, or the sudden appearance of his hand. What made this situation even more harrowing were the subtle signs in the sisters themselves. They bore features that seemed oddly disproportionate, eyes that seemed to watch the world in suspicion and fear. Some outsiders claimed they looked as if the family line had somehow twisted within these walls, a grotesque echo of the father's obsession with control and secrecy. Neighbors whispered of muttered conversations, of girls who rarely smiled, whose laughter was almost absent, and whose silence screamed of a trauma no one could intervene to stop. It's easy to dismiss such whispers as folklore, yet the fragments of letters, scraps of evidence, and the occasional testimony from townsfolk paint a chilling reality. This wasn't just neglect. It was a deliberate containment of life, innocence, and identity. The father's secret extended beyond simple cruelty. It infiltrated blood, behavior, and appearance, leaving marks that would haunt the girl. Inside the house, time seemed suspended. Days and nights blurred together, marked only by the faint light that slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls. The girls learned early that every sound carried weight. The creak of a floorboard, the rustle of fabric, even their own breathing could invite scrutiny. Their father's control was not loud or chaotic. It was quiet, insidious, a constant presence that made every movement calculated, every word measured. Food was provided, but rarely with warmth. The father's meticulousness extended even to meals. A bowl of soup placed precisely in front of them, bread torn in equal halves, a cup of water set just so. It wasn't nourishment. It was another instrument of control. He taught them, in ways that never needed to be spoken, that freedom was an illusion. Every corner of the house reinforced his dominion. The locked cabinets, the barred windows, the overhanging shadows that seemed to follow them wherever they moved. Despite this, the sisters clung to each other. In whispered conversations, they found a fleeting sense of humanity. They shared stories they had overheard from travelers passing by, imitating the voices of people they would never meet, imagining a world beyond the mountains. But these moments were fragile, always shadowed by the knowledge that any hint of independence could provoke punishment. Their father was a master of psychological manipulation, quiet threats, sudden glances, the way he would appear in doorways without a sound, ensuring they never felt safe. The isolation had another effect. It twisted the girls' perception of reality. With no peers, no outside influence, they measured the world entirely by his presence. Any deviation, any spark of curiosity was suppressed. Their laughter, rare and fragile, was stifled before it could bloom. They became shadows of themselves, living reminders of a secret now. Outside the walls of the cabin, the world moved on, indifferent yet quietly observant. The nearby townsfolk, a hardy people accustomed to hardship, couldn't ignore the peculiarity of the family. Strange sightings, fleeting glimpses of the sisters at dusk, and the occasional muffled cry carried on the wind painted a picture too unsettling to ignore. But few dared intervene. Gossip traveled like wildfire in those parts, but the townspeople were cautious. Stories were shared behind doors, whispered across fences, and murmured in church pews. Some spoke of the father's violent temper. Others hinted at an unnatural obsession with his daughters. Children were warned not to play near the cabin, and even adults, men who could face storms and bear hardships, felt a creeping dread whenever they passed the winding mountain path that led to the house. One elderly neighbor, who later tried to speak to authorities, described a sight that haunted him for years. "I saw the girls once, standing at the window. Their faces, something was wrong. I can't explain it. It wasn't just fear. It was like the house itself had twisted them, molded them into something I didn't recognize as human." Others reported similar accounts: shadows moving oddly, laughter that carried no joy, the faintest sound of a cry that died before it could reach a person's ears. Despite these observations, official investigations were limited, sporadic, and ultimately inconclusive. The father's reputation as a quiet, respectable man shielded him. A combination of isolation, fear, and cultural hesitation prevented anyone from uncovering the full truth. And so, the house remained a sealed-off world, its horrors whispered about, but never confronted. The sisters, trapped within their father's domain, began to exist in a liminal space, visible yet invisible, present yet absent. Their lives were measured not by freedom, but inside the cabin, the psychological strain on the sisters deepened with each passing day. It was a slow erosion of identity, a deliberate shaping of fear and obedience that left little room for the natural instincts of childhood. They moved through the house as though it were a labyrinth designed to entrap them, each corner a reminder of the father's omnipresent control. Sleep was irregular, punctuated by the creak of the floorboards or the sudden appearance of a shadow in the doorway. Mealtime, once a momentary respite, became a theater of scrutiny. Even small gestures, a glance, a sigh, a tremor of hands, were observed, catalogued, and sometimes punished. The girls learned that resistance took forms beyond defiance. Silence, stillness, the careful masking of emotion became survival tools. Yet, in the deepest recesses of their minds, a rebellion simmered, a desire to reclaim themselves, even in the smallest ways. Some historians suggest that the environment itself contributed to a distortion of reality. Without peers, without schooling, without any external reference points, the sisters' sense of normalcy warped. They internalized the father's authority as natural law, believing that every restriction, every command, was ordained. And yet, paradoxically, this very confinement sharpened their awareness of injustice, of the unnatural forces that held them captive. The psychological torment wasn't abstract. It was felt in the body and soul. One sister reportedly developed obsessive patterns, meticulously arranging objects in the house as though imposing order could create safety. The other became withdrawn, retreating into whispered storytelling, crafting imaginary lives that offered a fleeting sense of freedom. Both, in their ways, were attempting to preserve what little remained of their innocence, while the shadows of their father's control lingered in every corner. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The horror of the situation isn't only in the acts themselves, but in their enduring effects. These girls were shaped by fear, by secrecy, by a household that had twisted the very meaning of family. Their story reminds us that trauma can be invisible to the world, yet tangible, overwhelming, and haunting to those who bear it. The truth, when finally glimpsed, is often more grotesque than imagination could conjure. For decades, whispers of the family's peculiarities remained just that, fragments of rumor, easily dismissed by the outside world. Yet beneath those whispers lay a reality that defies comprehension. The father's control extended far beyond isolation. It penetrated the most intimate aspects of life, leaving marks not only on the sisters' freedom, but on their very bodies and identities. Historians later piecing together the story from letters, testimonies, and the occasional photograph discovered a pattern of abuse and manipulation that was meticulous, calculated, and chilling in its scale. The sisters' physical features, often remarked upon by neighbors, were not merely the result of genetics, but of repeated cycles of forced isolation and intergenerational trauma. Their father had crafted a household in which fear, secrecy, and unnatural control were the foundations of daily life. The sisters, for all their suffering, became unwilling symbols of the horrors that can flourish in isolation. They were trapped by walls, by rules, by an unseen authority, and yet even in this oppression, they exhibited fleeting moments of resistance. Small acts of defiance, secret whispers, hidden gestures, a refusal to fully submit to the manipulation, revealed an enduring spark of humanity. These moments, however fleeting, were reminders that even in extreme darkness, life persists. The outside world, meanwhile, remained largely unaware. Authorities were slow, neighbors were fearful, and the broader culture, steeped in traditions of privacy and mistrust of outside interference, offered little protection. The horror was real, yet invisible, shielded by the very remoteness that allowed it to exist. The sisters' suffering persisted quietly, a shadow that the mountains themselves seemed to hold secret. His story, as dark and grotesque as it is, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That evil can be subtle, that trauma can be invisible, and that family, traditionally a place of safety, can also be the epicenter of horror. To acknowledge it is to step into a history that is both fascinating and morally unsettling, a reminder of what humans are capable of when secrecy and obsession rule their lives. The story of these Appalachian sisters is not merely a tale of abuse. It is a window into the shadows of human behavior, a glimpse into the ways secrecy, fear, and isolation can warp the most intimate bonds. When we examine this history, we see more than just a single household's horror. We see a reflection of what can happen when vigilance fails, when communities look away, and when human cruelty hides behind the familiar guise of family. The sisters, in their confined lives, endured the unimaginable. They lived in constant tension, caught between obedience and the fragile, flickering hope of freedom. Their experiences remind us that the consequences of isolation extend beyond physical suffering. Trauma, like the shadows in their cabin, lingers long after the immediate danger has passed. The marks of fear, shame, and suppression are difficult to erase. Yet they tell a story that demands to be heard, even generations later. What is most haunting is the duality of their existence. They were both protected and imprisoned, shaped and distorted, loved in a twisted, unrecognizable way. Their father's obsession left an indelible imprint on their bodies, minds, and the surrounding land. The mountains, the forest, the cabin itself, all bore silent witness to the horror, storing the echoes of a history that most would prefer to forget. By revisiting these dark chapters, we confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the power of secrecy, and the vulnerability of innocence. We also honor the resilience of those who endured, those who carried on despite the weight of trauma. The story forces us to consider our own society, our own families, and the hidden corners where fear and control may still exist, unseen but potent. As we leave this tale behind, the images of the sisters, their gaunt faces and haunted eyes, linger in our minds. Their story is a reminder that history is not only recorded in books and monuments, but also in shadows, in whispers, and in the lives of those who suffered in silence. In uncovering it, we bear witness